Hello and welcome to the FinanceFeeds podcast series. And today on episode 7, I'm joined by a very prominent industry figure, Jonathan Baumgart. Hello, Jonathan.
Hi. Thanks for having me here. It's appreciated.
Great pleasure. Nice to speak to you. And
likewise.
Actually, Jonathan, for those who probably know Jonathan, he is of FXCM and Boston Technologies fame, and actually has moved on to consultancy and now is a partner at Money Matters and Atomic Consulting. So Jonathan is one of the alumni of some of the large Boston-based fintech and electronic trading sectors. So also injects a bit of charisma into today's electronic trading world. Am I right, Jonathan?
Yes. And in my spare time, I do a little bit of stand-up comedy. So I try to make a balance between the two. But first and foremost, I would say that I'm a businessman, and I've been doing this consulting work now for a couple of years, and it's been going really well.
Yeah, that's excellent to hear. Actually, as far as I know, Atomic Consulting specialises in consultation services for FX brokerages, as well as liquidity providers and white labels and technology vendors. So that's interesting. It's building on your institutional Forex experience at FXCM and technological experience at Boston. So it'd be very interesting to hear a bit more about that.
Sure. So, the way I started Atomic Consulting was I had worked at Boston Technologies. Prior to that, I'd been at FXCM, like you mentioned, and so I had a really good perspective on the market, having been in the retail space for many years, doing sales, and then seeing the other side of the picture, so to say, when I was at BT. There I got to learn more about how liquidity works, bridges, and the entire infrastructure of a broker. I'd say also at BT, it was very inspirational to work in a kind of fast-growing startup type environment. And I wanted to take the knowledge that I gained and try on my own and see what I could do.
Yeah, that's
and so I began actually in Poland, and that's where currently I reside. I've done some basic work for a broker there, and around that time I was contacted by a referral who needed help working with MT4. They had just purchased a license there, and they needed some assistance in getting started. And so I realized that there was also a need for IT consultation. So in addition to just providing general consulting to the different industry participants you mentioned, we're also doing kind of IT work for not just brokers, but we work with liquidity providers as well as a very large white label provider.
Right. Yeah, I mean that's actually a very interesting thing, because at Boston, Massachusetts, where your industry knowledge comes from originally, is a concentrated area of very intelligent technological professionals and extremely high-tech programmers and people who come up with ingenious ideas, and those kinds of as you see today, those particular innovative companies that reside in that region of Massachusetts are producing some of the finest technology solutions for the industry. And actually there's liquidity providers there are bridge companies and so forth. So actually you've gained that particular background, which is a very good background, and then taken that to Poland, which is a market where there are some retail brokerages, but it'd be very interesting to hear how that translates into a Central European region, really.
Sure. Yeah, you're absolutely right about Boston. I mean, when I was working there, it was great to see how much it was taking off. And the area where the office of BT was at the time, or a couple of years earlier, was just these old factories. And
yes,
if you go there now, it's really expanded. And so for me, it was very good to be in that environment. It taught me a lot. And you're absolutely right. I was able to take that experience and bring it to a place like Poland. I chose Poland not only because one of our first client relations was here, but this is actually a growing part of the world. Everywhere you look, where I am in Krakow, you're going to see cranes coming up. It's really growing, and actually our team members have gone to a conference nearby for fintech startups. So this is a very fast-growing place for that, I would say, type of software and other types of services that Boston is also responsible for, or Boston had done. So it's nice being here. In terms of the market in Poland, I'd say it's very regulated, and we're more here due to the advantage of the time zone and the fact that I think Poland is a good place if you want to have a business, due to the fact that you have a very large pool of educated individuals, especially in Krakow, and it's competitive pricing as well, and so it's a good combination to have new business.
Yeah, that's very true. Certainly Poland as an economy modernized itself in the last 15 years, certainly since 2004. And actually, exactly as you rightly say, is one of the specific parts of that region where there is an intelligent younger population. However, as far as I'm concerned, there are 25 years in the industry, I've really only noticed one large company there, which is, well, actually there's now two. The first one was Don McCluskey, and the other is XTB. So these are kind of prominent forces in Poland, but do you see much more competition coming up for those in the future, and a more developed retail FX sector growing, making the most of the talent base there and actually establishing itself as a major European market?
It's really a really good question. You're right. Those are the two major players. I would say in terms of the growth of FX specifically in Poland, it's really going to depend on the regulations. It has become more strict here, and that's raised the bar for competition. I would say that not just Poland, but this part of the world, because it's growing and emerging, it's going to offer an opportunity for any brokers, not just in Poland, but perhaps looking to have a regional presence in places like Slovakia, Hungary, Bulgaria, the neighboring countries and areas. There is a lot of potential because this is a place that's growing rapidly. To get started in Poland is definitely not impossible. However, you do need to comply with a lot of the rules and regulations that are set forth by the local authority, and that does create a bit of a barrier to entry.
Yes.
However, for what we're doing, which is consulting, we have clients all over the world. We do a few type of special consultation projects for those who are interested in Poland, but we can work with brokers and clients anywhere.
That's it. Okay. So let's say I was actually, what you say about the other regions of that particular part of Europe is interesting, because in certain places outside Poland you have a very strong talent base of computer programmers, web designers, people who are individuals but can work on a freelance basis, actually setting up the components of the front end of a system. So that's actually a vital thing for a brokerage which wants to keep its development costs down, yet have good technology development. For example, in Bulgaria, you have a lot of good web developers, a lot of good programmers, and they actually are able they understand that that's a country which really understands the Forex industry. So it's a kind of good talent base all round, really. So that's one interesting thing. The other factor is, let's say I'm a broker and I want to start a new startup, and I want to move it to have it in a specific region, which might be somewhere in Europe or somewhere in the Asia-Pacific region. I can come to Atomic Consulting or Money Matters and actually say, this is what I want to do, and you will actually consult on the entire startup and the entire structure of building the company. Am I right?
Yes, that's absolutely correct. What we do is, I think, something very unique in the marketplace is I can, and I say this with confidence, literally offer any service that a new or a medium-sized broker needs. Especially if you're new to the industry, things are rapidly changing. When it comes to regulation, that's just one topic that the FCA, CISIC are constantly changing the rules, and which areas you can open up a bank account and where you can get a license is always changing. And it's honestly too quick even for websites and other sources of information to update. Yeah, that's the value that I can add.
That I agree with, and I think actually if that's the case, I'd like to ask you, there's something really important. I've done some research about, you mentioned banking. I've done some research about banking. That's become might seem a very low-tech consideration, but it is something which is becoming a bugbear of a lot of brokerages around the world, is that major banks are becoming reluctant to actually take on operational capital accounts and client fund accounts for Forex companies, especially in the retail sector. Now, in Eastern Europe, for example, in Estonia, Latvia, and other parts of Eastern Europe, they will do so, but there are risks in terms of security of funds. And we know of a case where a particular brokerage in Cyprus had a Bank of Cyprus account. They, without notice, they just closed his account down. So he had no choice other than to open an account with a third tier bank in Estonia or somewhere like that. Latvia, I can't remember exactly where it was, but somewhere in East Europe. And actually, the security was so lax that he managed to, unfortunately, have a hack, which ended up $300,000 being stolen from the capital account, and there was absolutely no recourse. So these kinds of things, how do you mitigate as a brokerage in today's society having difficulties navigating getting an account with a major bank like in Britain or in Cyprus or in America or in Australia, compared to then having to go to a third tier bank and finding that it's a risk because it might be the security isn't as high?
Exactly. It's a very good point with Cyprus that you make, and really it's changing as fast as we're speaking in Eastern Europe. It is possible, depending on the type of brokerage, to still get a bank account in this part of the world, but similar to other things I mentioned, the bar is being raised. What I often advise is it is possible here to get a bank account. We can also assist with getting one in some of the more Pacific regions of the world outside of Europe, with banks that are reputable and do have a history and don't really take those kind of actions that you saw in Cyprus. But ultimately, I would encourage a broker to look at this as a short-term solution and work on some type of license. You can get licenses now in other parts of the world relatively cheaper compared to something as big as Bulgaria and Cyprus. And it's kind of, I would say, a stepping stone that if you have a license, it's much easier than, or at least opens more doors to different types of bank accounts. But if you're purely, let's say, an offshore broker, you will have challenges getting a bank account. And in a way, I think it's positive. It makes the industry a bit more competitive and a bit more clean now that the banks are being more strict about this.
I see. That makes sense. That makes sense. And in terms of being nervous, let's say you've got an operational capital of something like $3 million because you've got 730,000 euros according to the MiFID law on regulatory capital, and then another two or 3 million in terms of operational capital. What is the potential risk of having no choice other than to move that to an Eastern European bank or an offshore company?
Well, in that particular case, if you do have a MiFID license, and that allows you to have a bank account in any of the EU member states. Now, in terms of what particular bank you might be able to work with, that's a good point. But an EU license is a major stepping stone there. Some banks might turn you away, but you do have a better chance of getting an account with a more stable bank. I think the risks, at least what I've seen, are presented when a broker doesn't have a license. And I do agree, though, that Cyprus is a unique type of scenario, and this was disastrous for the industry. And I wouldn't suggest personally to have a bank account there if you can get one in a more stable type of country like Germany.
Nor would I. You're absolutely right. Nor would I. This is the ironic thing. That's a country where the very, very established, quite sophisticated retail forex industry, including all of its technology vendors and platform providers and liquidity companies and so forth, all operate. And it's a very, very well organised ecosystem there. But the Bank of Cyprus does not understand the industry, and they are, not to put too fine a point on it, useless.
Yes, I would say that it's not a good idea to have the money there, especially given the incident and the risks. However, the good part is if you do obtain a license, that's a passport to all of Europe. So you're not forced to have a bank account in Cyprus. It's often actually a misconception that some feel, if I have a license in Cyprus, I have to have a bank account there. It doesn't have to be the case.
I see. That is interesting. I think I would agree with you entirely. If it was me, I would probably look to do something like go to a British bank like Lloyds Bank. I know this is the irony again. HSBC and RBS, which are major interbank dealers, will not take nowadays forex companies, nor will Australian banks like Macquarie, even though they have quite significant vested interest in derivatives trading and so forth in Australia. However, Lloyds Bank will. So I would do that if it was me.
Yes, it's a good point. There still are options, and kind of getting back, to the point I mentioned earlier. If you were able to get a license in Europe, a lot of your headaches go away. The major banking challenges that at least I'm running into are those who come to me and they have an offshore setup, meaning they've registered a company in St. Vincent or Belize somewhere without the license aspect. That really is making it difficult. But as I mentioned, I view it as a positive. The industry is becoming more mature, and because it's more difficult to get a bank account, it's really forcing those who want to do this to be more serious. And in my view, that also makes for a more credible offering.
Yes, understand. Now, moving on to another thing, that's very useful, by the way, Jonathan. I'm sure that is, I'm very glad we had that conversation. Moving on to another thing, charisma. I think, and you probably also agree, that this is a very, and I respect this, I think it's a fabulous facet. It's a very suited, very institutional, very serious business where people learn their profession and are very enthusiastic about it, right the way through from the institutional level, right the way down to the retail sales division. However, you're one of those guys who is quite rare in this business, that you've got some kind of charisma that you want to put out on the stage and so forth. So that's kind of interesting. Stand-up comedy and technological solutions at major vendors is kind of something which you don't see very often. So let's have a little bit of an insight into that.
Sure, thank you for the compliment. Where this got started was I began writing jokes on occasion at FXCM. And you're right that the biggest challenge is FX is great, and this is my career. However, anyone knows it can be quite dry. You're just looking at numbers, and I think at least to break the ice and just to make things a little bit more comfortable and what can often be a high-stress environment, that humor is very important. And so I began writing jokes just on occasion to my colleagues at FXCM and sharing them around. And I noticed I got a lot of positive reception. And so here in our office in Poland, to me we have a good environment. We're doing a lot of stressful things, but I keep it at times as relaxed as I can because I know we're under a lot of pressure. And so I began telling some jokes here in the office, and it's kind of a testing ground for me. And so I decided, why not do a stand-up routine? And it ended up going very well. And so I plan on doing this more. I want to do a little bit of traveling along with my work and just go to places and try out different types of material I have. A lot of my themes are based on, comparing the differences between America and Europe and other kind of jokes or items related to me being here, not as an outsider, but as an American. And so, as I mentioned earlier, first and foremost, I'd say I'm a businessman, but I do have an artistic side to me. And this is something I'd like to explore in my free time as a way to grow a different hopefully career path one day, although at the moment it's still a hobby.
I think that's absolutely fabulous, and I share your enthusiasm for social observations and actually noticing the amusing anecdotes that come from it, especially within the industry. I mean, there are things which are very detailed and very interesting, which can also be made light of. That's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one it's more of a corny joke, but this is one of the ones that I told is a bunch of investment bankers are going for lunch, and what do they order? A pound Swiss burger and a Dodd-Frank on the side.
Exactly. Brilliant stuff. Anyway, I wish you all the very best, Jonathan. So thank you so much for joining us. It was a great pleasure to speak to you, as always.
Thank you. Likewise. Thank you.
See you soon.
Take care.
All the best. That's Jonathan Baumgart of Money Matters and Atomic Consulting. This is Andrew Sachs-McLeod. Join us next time for the Finance Feeds podcast series. Speak to you soon. All the best.